Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
When my mom called, sobbing about my brother's arrest, the first words out of her mouth weren't, "I'm sorry," or even, "Can you believe this?" Instead, she said, "You have to help him." It took me a moment to process what she was saying. I was in the middle of making dinner, and the sound of her voice stopped me in my tracks. She sounded frantic, like the ground had just been ripped out from under her. "Wait, what?" I asked, turning down the stove burner. "It's Matt," she cried. "He's in jail. They're saying he ran some kind of scheme. Oh my God, this can't be real. You have to help him." I stood there, gripping the counter, my mind struggling to catch up. "Matt, jail? A scheme? What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "They're saying he stole money," she said, her words tumbling out between sobs. "But it's not true. It can't be. You know, Matt, he'd never do something like that. He's not a criminal." The thing is, I didn't know that. Not anymore. For as long as I could remember, Matt had been the star of our family. He was the golden child, the one my parents put on a pedestal. They loved to brag about his big personality, his charm, his success in business. But over the years, I'd seen a side of him that they refused to acknowledge, a side that cut corners, made excuses, and acted like the rules didn't apply to him. Still, hearing the words Matt and jail in the same sentence felt surreal. "What exactly happened?" I asked, trying to get a straight answer. Mom's voice cracked as she explained. "The police came to his house this morning. They arrested him in front of the neighbors. They said he's been running a Ponzi scheme, that he's stolen money from his investors. But it's all lies. He's being framed, I know it." I wanted to believe her, but something in my gut told me otherwise. "And what do you want me to do about it?" I asked, already knowing where this was headed. Mom hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "He needs bail money," she said finally. "They're holding him in jail, and we don't have enough to cover it." "I thought maybe you could." "Absolutely not." I cut her off. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then Mom's voice came back, quieter but no less desperate. "Please," she begged. "This isn't the time to hold grudges. He's your brother." A bitter laugh escaped my throat before I could stop it. "Grudges? Are you serious right now?" "This isn't about a grudge, Mom. This is about Matt making his bed and lying in it." "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "He's not a bad person. He just made a mistake." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. "A mistake?" I snapped. "Mom, he didn't accidentally trip and fall into a Ponzi scheme. This was a choice. A deliberate choice to scam people out of their money." Her sobs grew louder, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But it was quickly drowned out by years of pent-up frustration. This wasn't the first time Matt had gotten himself into trouble. Far from it. There had been bad investments, failed business ventures, and countless other mistakes my parents had swept under the rug. Every time, they found a way to excuse his behavior, to frame it as some kind of fluke. Meanwhile, I'd spent my entire life trying to be the responsible one, the one who never needed rescuing. And what did I get for it? Dismissed, overlooked, accused of being jealous whenever I pointed out the glaring double standards. And now here we were. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said finally, my voice firm. "But I can't help him. I won't." She didn't take it well. "Do you even hear yourself right now?" she shouted. "He's your brother. Your family. How can you just turn your back on him when he needs you?" I closed my eyes, trying to keep my composure. "How can you keep enabling him?" I countered. "How many chances does he get? How many times do you bail him out before you realize he's never going to change?" "He's not like that," she insisted. "You don't know what it's like for him. The pressure he's under, the stress of trying to make something of himself." "Are you seriously trying to make me feel sorry for him?" I asked, incredulous. "Because it's not working." The conversation ended abruptly. Mom hung up after hurling one last guilt trip my way. "I hope you can live with yourself." For the rest of the night, her words played on a loop in my head. Was I being too harsh? Should I have stepped in, if only for the sake of keeping the peace? But then I thought about the victims, the people Matt had swindled, whose lives he had likely destroyed. And I thought about all the times I had tried to warn my parents, only to be dismissed as bitter or jealous. No, I told myself, this wasn't my mess to clean up. Have you ever been put in a position where doing the right thing meant disappointing the people you love? Because that's exactly where I was. And as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't keep sacrificing myself to protect someone who had never taken responsibility for his actions. This time, Matt was on his own. From the outside, my family probably looked picture perfect. My parents were the kind of people who hosted neighborhood barbecues and always showed up early for school events. And my brother Matt? He was the shining star of it all. Even as a kid, Matt had this magnetic charm. He was the one who could talk his way out of anything, flashing that effortless grin that made everyone around him melt. Teachers adored him. Coaches fought to have him on their teams. At family gatherings, the adults would pat him on the back and say, "This one's going places." I was different, quiet, studious. The kind of kid who stayed up late reading or meticulously planning out school projects weeks in advance. My accomplishments were steady and predictable. Honor roll, science fair ribbons, consistent performances. But they didn't have the same sparkle as Matt's. My parents never said it outright, but it was obvious who they were more impressed by. When we were kids, it was small things. If Matt got a B+ on a math test, there'd be cheers and ice cream to celebrate. "He's really coming into his own," Dad would say proudly. If I got an A, it was more of a nod and a, "Good job, kiddo. Keep it up." I remember one summer when I spent weeks building a birdhouse for the local fair. I painted it bright blue, added a tiny swing to the front porch, and even crafted miniature shingles for the roof. I was so proud of it. The day of the fair, I begged my parents to come see it on display. They promised they would, but when the time came, they were too busy driving Matt to baseball practice. "You understand, don't you?" Mom said, her tone almost dismissive. "Matt's team is counting on him. Besides, we already know you did a great job." I didn't cry that day. I just smiled and nodded because that's what I was supposed to do. But something inside me cracked. As we got older, the disparities became harder to ignore. When I got accepted into a good state college, my parents congratulated me, but warned me about taking on too much debt. "You'll have to work part-time to cover what scholarships don't," Dad said. "It's important to learn responsibility." When Matt announced he was moving across the country to attend a private university with no scholarships in sight, their reaction was completely different. "We'll figure it out," Mom said confidently. "You focus on your studies. We'll handle the finances." I wanted to scream. How was it fair that I had to scrape together money from tutoring gigs and retail shifts while Matt got a free pass? But every time I brought it up, the response was the same. "Why can't you just be happy for him? You sound jealous." That word, jealous, became their go-to explanation for everything. When I pointed out that Matt had wrecked his car twice, and they still bought him another one, I was jealous. When I questioned why they didn't push him harder to pay back the money he borrowed from them, I was jealous. When I asked why they always bent over backward to accommodate his plans while I was left to fend for myself, I was jealous. It was like no matter what I did or said, I couldn't escape that label. The truth is, I was jealous, but not for the reasons they thought. I wasn't jealous of Matt's charm or his flashy successes. I didn't want to be him. I just wanted to matter as much as he did. I wanted to be the one they rearranged their schedules for, the one they stayed up late worrying about, the one they believed in so completely that they'd do anything to see me succeed. But instead, I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the one they didn't have to worry about because they knew I'd figure it out on my own. Looking back, I can see how much that dynamic shaped me. I learned early on that if I wanted something, I'd have to get it myself. I couldn't rely on anyone else, not even my own parents. That independence became both my armor and my prison. On the one hand, it made me resilient, capable of handling whatever life threw at me. On the other hand, it left me constantly questioning my worth. Was I not worthy of their attention because I didn't demand it the way Matt did? Or was it simply easier to give everything to him because he always needed more? I'll never forget one of the last family dinners we had before everything fell apart. Matt was talking about his latest business venture, a vague-sounding startup that was set to revolutionize the industry. Dad leaned forward, hanging on every word, while Mom beamed with pride. "You've always had such big ideas," she said. "We're so proud of you." When Matt left the room, I couldn't help myself. I turned to them and asked, "What if it doesn't work out? What if it's just another one of his pipe dreams?" Mom frowned. "Why do you always have to be so negative? You're just jealous because he's not afraid to take risks." I didn't respond. What was the point? Did you ever feel like you were never enough, no matter how hard you tried, simply because you weren't someone else? Because that's exactly how I felt. And no matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I worked, I always knew I'd come second to Matt's charm and ambition. Matt always knew how to make a good impression. Whether it was his smooth talking, his sharp suits, or the way he carried himself with unshakable confidence, people believed in him. My parents, most of all. For years, they bought into the image he created, a self-made success story who was destined for greatness. But the more time I spent around him, the more I started to see through the cracks in that polished exterior. The first sign was his spending. In his mid-20s, Matt moved into a luxury apartment downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek furniture, and a building with a concierge. It was the kind of place you'd see on a TV show. Pretty nice, huh? He said with a grin when I visited. It's great, I replied, trying to sound supportive. How much does something like this cost? He waved the question away, like it was beneath him. Don't worry about it. I got it covered, but I did worry about it. At the time, Matt was working for a company I'd never heard of, doing something vague that he described as consulting. When I asked for details, he'd give me a knowing smile and say, "You wouldn't get it. It's complicated. It didn't add up. How could someone his age afford a place like that? And if it was as legitimate as he claimed, why was he so evasive about it?" Over the years, the inconsistencies piled up. Matt always seemed to have money, new cars, expensive vacations, designer clothes, but his career path was a mystery. One year, he was a financial advisor. The next, he was running a startup. Then came the real estate investments. Every new venture sounded impressive on the surface, but when you scratched the surface, there was nothing underneath. One Thanksgiving, I tried to press him about it. "So, how's work going?" I asked casually over dinner. "Busy," he replied with a shrug. "We just closed a major deal." "What kind of deal?" He paused, just long enough for me to notice. "Just some corporate stuff," he said vaguely before changing the subject. I brought my concerns to my parents more than once. "Doesn't it seem weird to you that Matt's always changing jobs?" I asked during one of our conversations. Mom frowned. "He's just ambitious. He's trying to find his place in the world. But doesn't it bother you that he's so vague about what he does?" She sighed, like she was tired of having this conversation. "You always assume the worst. Why can't you just support him? He's doing the best he can." Dad chimed in. "Matt's a big thinker. Not everyone takes a straight path to success. You could learn a thing or two from his drive." I wanted to scream. How could they not see what I was seeing? How could they keep defending him when it was so obvious that something wasn't right? But every time I tried to bring it up, they shut me down. "You're just jealous," they'd say, brushing me off like a pesky fly. The isolation was the worst part. It wasn't just that they refused to see the truth. It was that they made me feel like I was the problem for even questioning it. No matter how valid my concerns were, they always found a way to spin it back on me. "Why can't you be happy for him? You've always been so critical." Matt's just different. He's not afraid to take risks. That word, risks, became their favorite way to explain away his behavior. His vague business ventures? Risks. His flashy spending? Risks. The times he borrowed money from them and never paid it back? Risks. They acted like he was some kind of visionary, and I was the bitter sibling who couldn't appreciate his brilliance. The final straw came at a family barbecue. Matt had shown up late, as usual, wearing a Rolex that he was eager to show off. "Pretty sweet, right?" he said, holding out his wrist for everyone to admire. Dad whistled. "How'd you swing that?" Matt smirked. "Let's just say it was a good quarter." I couldn't hold back anymore. "A good quarter doing what?" I asked, crossing my arms. He shot me an annoyed glance. "Work." "What kind of work?" "You wouldn't get it," he said dismissively, turning back to Dad. "Try me," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. The tension in the air was palpable. Matt rolled his eyes and muttered something about how I always have to make everything a big deal. My parents glared at me like I was the one ruining the mood. "Can't you just let it go?" Mom whispered angrily. "You're embarrassing yourself." I stared at her in disbelief. "I'm embarrassing myself? Are you even listening to him?" But it didn't matter. They didn't want to hear it. They never did. That night, as I drove home, I felt more alone than ever. It wasn't just that my parents refused to see the cracks in Matt's facade. It was that they refused to see me. My concerns, my frustrations, my need for fairness. It was like none of it mattered. They had their golden child, their perfect son, and I was just the inconvenient voice of reason they wished would go away. Looking back, I wonder how much of it was willful ignorance and how much of it was genuine belief in Matt's charm. Maybe they were too blinded by their hopes for him to see the truth. Or maybe they saw it and didn't want to admit it. Either way, the cracks were there. And as much as they tried to ignore them, I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole facade came crashing down. It started with a phone call, a moment so surreal that I almost thought I was imagining it. My phone buzzed on a Monday morning just as I was about to head into a meeting. Seeing Mom flash on the screen wasn't unusual, but the urgency in her voice the moment I picked up was. "Matt's been arrested," she cried, her words tumbling over each other. I froze. "Wait, what? Arrested for what?" "They're saying he's been running some kind of scam," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's not true. It can't be true. You know Matt. He's not like that. This is a mistake." I barely registered her words as I sat down, my mind racing. Arrested? Matt? My brother, the golden child, the family's pride and joy. What kind of scam? I asked, my voice shaking. A Ponzi scheme, she whispered, as though saying the words too loudly might make them real. The rest of the day was a blur. The story hit the news almost immediately. Headlines blared across local and national outlets. Businessman arrested in multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Dozens of victims defrauded in elaborate financial scam. I clicked on every article I could find, devouring the details. According to the reports, Matt had been running the scheme for years, convincing investors to hand over their savings with promises of high returns. But instead of investing the money, he'd used it to fund his lavish lifestyle. Luxury cars, designer clothes, expensive vacations. The more I read, the more my stomach churned. It was all there, laid out in black and white. The Rolex he'd shown off at the barbecue. The luxury apartment. The vague job descriptions. Everything I'd suspected. Everything I'd tried to warn my parents about. It was all true. When I called Mom back that evening, she sounded even more frantic. Have you seen what they're saying about him? She asked, her voice shaking. It's everywhere. They're calling him a criminal, a con artist. But they don't know him. He's not like that. Mom, I said cautiously, the reports are pretty detailed. They have evidence, bank records, victim statements. It's lies, she snapped, cutting me off. They're twisting everything to make him look bad. He's being set up. I know he is. I could barely believe what I was hearing. You really think this is all just a misunderstanding? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Yes, she said firmly. Matt's always been ambitious, but he'd never hurt anyone. You know that. I wanted to scream. How could she still defend him? Even now, with all the evidence piling up, Dad wasn't any better. When I called him later, hoping for some kind of rational conversation, he gave me the same lines. They're exaggerating, he said dismissively. Matt's a good kid. He probably made a few mistakes, but who hasn't? This whole thing is being blown out of proportion. Dad, I said slowly, this isn't a speeding ticket. He stole millions of dollars from people. There's no coming back from this. He sighed heavily, like I was the one being unreasonable. You don't understand the pressure he's been under. He's been trying to build something for himself, to make us proud. Maybe he got in over his head, but that doesn't make him a monster. For days, the headlines kept coming. The victim count rose with each new report. Retirees who had lost their life savings. Single parents who'd trusted Matt with their children's college funds. Small business owners who'd handed over everything, hoping for a chance to grow. The stories were heartbreaking. And the worst part? Matt didn't seem to care. In court, he showed no remorse. He walked in wearing a tailored suit, his head held high, like he was still the same charming businessman who'd fooled everyone. Watching the footage made my blood boil. How could he be so arrogant, so detached, knowing the lives he'd ruined? The calls from my parents grew more desperate as the reality of the situation set in. We have to help him, Mom said one night, her voice thick with tears. He's our son. We can't just leave him to rot in jail. What do you expect me to do? I asked. Bail him out? Pay his legal fees? Pretend this never happened? You could show some compassion, she snapped. He's your brother. I felt my patience snap. You want compassion? What about the people he scammed? What about their families? Do they not deserve compassion? He made a mistake, she said weakly. I laughed bitterly. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. This was a calculated, deliberate choice. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it anyway. As much as I wanted to feel vindicated, all I felt was sadness. I thought about the victims, the people whose lives had been turned upside down because of Matt's greed. And I thought about my parents, clinging to the illusion of their perfect son, refusing to see the truth even as it stared them in the face. But most of all, I thought about the little boy Matt used to be, the one who made me laugh with his silly impressions, who built forts in the living room with me, who once had the whole world in front of him. I didn't recognize the man he had become. For years, my parents had insisted I was jealous of Matt. Jealous of his charm, his ambition, his so-called success. But now, as I watched their golden child fall from grace, I realized something. I wasn't jealous. I was heartbroken. Heartbroken for the people he had hurt. Heartbroken for the family we used to be. And heartbroken because, deep down, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The call came late in the evening, just as I was settling down after a long day. I almost didn't answer, but when I saw Mom's name on the screen, I sighed and picked up. Hi, Mom, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Her voice was trembling, a mixture of desperation and exhaustion. Sweetheart, we need to talk. I braced myself. What's going on? It's about Matt, she said, as if that wasn't obvious. We've been talking to his lawyer, and, well, the bail amount is higher than we thought. We don't have enough. There it was, the other shoe finally dropping. What does that have to do with me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She hesitated, then said the words I'd been dreading. We were hoping you could help. I let out a sharp laugh, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to bail him out? Not all of it, she said quickly, as if that made a difference. Just a portion. We'll pay you back, I promise. But we need to get him out of there. He doesn't belong in jail. Mom, he scammed people out of millions of dollars, I said, my voice rising. Where exactly do you think he belongs? She started crying then, soft and pitiful. You don't understand, she whispered. He's your brother. He's family. We have to help him. That word, family, hit me like a punch to the gut. For as long as I could remember, my parents had used it as a shield, a way to justify their actions and dismiss my feelings. Family meant loyalty. Family meant sacrifice. Family meant putting Matt first, no matter what it cost the rest of us. But now, they weren't just asking for my patience or understanding. They were asking for my savings, money I'd worked years to build. The very idea made my blood boil. Do you even hear yourself right now? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. You're asking me to put my entire future at risk for Matt. Again, it's not just for Matt, she said weakly. It's for the family. If he goes to prison, it'll ruin everything. Everything, I repeated, incredulous. Mom, he already ruined everything. Do you even hear the stories people are telling about him? He took their savings, their kids' college funds, their retirements. And now you want me to reward him for that? Dad's voice cut in then, firm and authoritative. It's not about rewarding him. It's about giving him a chance to fight this. He's not a bad person. He just got in over his head. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you seriously still defending him? He's our son, Dad said simply. And I'm your daughter, I snapped. But that's never seemed to matter, has it? The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Finally, Mom broke the silence. That's not fair, she said quietly. We've always loved you. Love me? I said, my voice trembling with emotion. You loved me as long as I didn't ask for anything. As long as I didn't need you. But the second I spoke up, the second I questioned how you treated Matt, I was jealous. I was the problem. That's not true, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. It is true, I said, refusing to let them off the hook. You've spent your whole lives cleaning up Matt's messes, making excuses for him, and bending over backward to protect him. And where has it gotten you? Where has it gotten us? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, years of resentment spilling out all at once. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to get where I am? I continued. I've worked my ass off to build a stable life, to save for a future where I don't have to rely on anyone. And now you're asking me to throw that all away. For him, we're not asking you to throw anything away, Mom said, her voice pleading. We're asking you to help your brother, to help your family. Family, I repeated bitterly. That's the only argument you ever have, isn't it? Family. But what about when I needed help? What about when I was struggling to pay for school or to keep my head above water? Where was family then? Neither of them had an answer for that. I sat there, gripping the phone, my heart pounding. A part of me wanted to hang up, to walk away, and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still craved their approval, that still wanted to believe they could change, kept me on the line. You've always been stronger than Matt, Mom said finally, her voice soft and trembling. You've always been able to take care of yourself. But he's not like you. He needs us. There it was again, that same old refrain. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'm sorry, I said finally, my voice cold and firm. But I can't help you. I won't. Mom started crying again, and Dad muttered something about me being selfish, but I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I ended the call and sat in silence, staring at the wall. For years, I told myself that my parents' favoritism didn't bother me anymore, that I'd moved past it. But in that moment, all the old wounds felt fresh again. They'd chosen Matt, over and over, no matter how much it hurt me. And now, they were asking me to do the same. But this time, I chose myself. When I agreed to meet my parents, I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. All I knew was that something had to be said. Years of resentment and unanswered questions had built up inside me, and with Matt's arrest shining a glaring light on all the cracks in our family, I couldn't stay silent any longer. We met at their house, the one I grew up in. It felt smaller than I remembered, like time had shrunk it, but the walls still carried the same old memories. I sat across from them at the kitchen table, a place where so many family discussions had taken place over the years. This one I knew would be different. Mom sat with her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes red and puffy. Dad leaned back in his chair, his jaw set in that stubborn way that always meant he was bracing himself for a fight. "Thanks for coming," Mom said softly. I nodded but didn't return the sentiment. "Let's not waste time," I said. "We need to talk about Matt. And about everything else." They exchanged a glance, the kind of silent communication that comes from years of marriage. It was Dad who spoke first. "We know you're upset," he began, his tone measured. "And we know the situation with Matt has been hard on you." I couldn't help but laugh, short, bitter, and entirely devoid of humor. "Hard on me? That's what you think this is about?" Mom flinched, but I pressed on. "This isn't just about Matt getting arrested. It's about everything that led up to this. The lies, the enabling, the way you both put him on a pedestal while treating me like an afterthought. That's not fair," Mom said quickly. "We've always loved you. You've always loved me." I shot back, "But you've never treated me the same. And don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about." The words came tumbling out then, years of bottled-up anger spilling over like a dam breaking. I reminded them of the time they bought Matt a new car after he wrecked his old one, while I had to save for 2 years to buy my own. I brought up the loans they'd given him to start his countless failed businesses, loans that were never repaid, while I worked part-time jobs all through college to avoid debt. "You called it ambition," I said, my voice rising. "You said he was just trying to find his way. But what about me? When I asked for help, where was your support? When I accomplished something, where was your pride?" Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. Dad, on the other hand, looked like he was trying to control his temper. "We did what we thought was best," he said finally. "Matt needed more help than you did. You've always been stronger, more independent." "That's not a compliment," I said sharply. "That's an excuse. You didn't help me because you didn't think you had to. And you helped Matt because you refused to let him face the consequences of his actions. And look where it got him." The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. "You can't blame us for this," Mom said after a long pause, her voice trembling. "Matt made his own choices. We didn't tell him to do what he did." "No," I said, my tone cold. "But you created the environment that let him think it was okay. Every time he messed up, you cleaned up after him. Every time he failed, you bailed him out. You taught him that he could get away with anything because you'd always be there to fix it." "That's not fair," Dad said again, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I shot back. "He scammed people out of their life savings, and you're still defending him. You're still trying to make it someone else's fault, his stress, his ambition, the pressure he was under. When are you going to admit that you were part of the problem?" Mom's tears were flowing freely now, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered all the times I'd been made to feel invisible, all the times my feelings had been dismissed or ignored. "This didn't happen in a vacuum," I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. "You spent years enabling him, building him up at the expense of everyone else. And now you're asking me to clean up the mess you helped create. I can't do it. I won't. We're trying to fix things," Mom said, her voice breaking. "We're trying to make it right." "Are you?" I asked. "Or are you just trying to save him again?" The conversation ended without a clear resolution. I left their house feeling drained, like I'd poured out every ounce of energy I had. I didn't know if they truly understood what I was saying or if they ever would. Driving home, I thought about the little moments growing up when I'd longed for their approval, their attention, their acknowledgement. Those moments felt so far away now, like they belonged to someone else's life. I wanted to believe that this confrontation would change things, that it would force them to see the truth. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Some wounds are too deep to heal, some patterns too ingrained to break. I had confronted the past, but I didn't know if reconciliation was possible. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I even wanted it to be. I don't think there's ever a truly perfect moment to make a decision that could change your life and your family's forever. No amount of pacing, sleepless nights, or internal debates can make it easier. When it came to Matt, I was stuck at a crossroads. On one side, there was the version of me who had been shaped by years of being dismissed, sidelined, and overlooked, the part of me that screamed no every time I thought about bailing him out. On the other side, there was the version of me who still believed in family, who still carried around the guilt that comes with walking away from the people who raised you. That part of me whispered, "What if you'll regret it? What if this is the moment where you prove you're better than they think you are?" The problem was, neither side felt entirely right. The question that kept circling in my mind was this: what do I owe my family? For years, I told myself that family was about loyalty, about sticking together even when things were hard. That's what my parents had always taught me, what they used to justify their endless support of Matt. But did loyalty mean sacrificing myself? Did it mean ignoring my own needs, my own boundaries, to clean up a mess I didn't make? I thought about the victims, the people Matt had swindled. They hadn't deserved what he'd done to them, but neither did I. And yet here I was being asked to pay the price for his choices again. Would helping him make me complicit in their suffering? Or would it make me compassionate? Justice was another word that haunted me during those sleepless nights. Growing up, I'd always believed in fairness. If you did the right thing, you were rewarded. If you hurt people, you faced the consequences. It was a simple equation. But life isn't simple. Justice isn't simple. Matt deserved to face the consequences of his actions. I knew that. But at the same time, I wondered if justice was about more than just punishment. Could there be room for redemption? I thought about the Matt I used to know, the little boy who used to make silly faces at me when I was upset, who would share his Halloween candy even when I didn't ask. Was there still a piece of that person inside him? Or had he been swallowed entirely by the man who had stolen and lied his way into a cell? And then there was compassion. I'd spent so long being angry at my parents, at Matt, at the entire unfair dynamic of our family. But anger is exhausting. It eats away at you, leaving you bitter and drained. If I chose not to help, I could walk away with my head held high, certain that I was standing up for myself. But would I feel better? Or would the guilt creep in, whispering that I had turned my back when they needed me most? Helping him didn't feel right, but leaving him there didn't feel entirely right either. I found myself thinking about the concept of forgiveness. Not the kind of forgiveness where you let someone off the hook or pretend the past doesn't matter, but the kind of forgiveness that's more for your own sake than theirs. Could I forgive Matt for what he'd done? Not just to me, but to everyone he'd hurt? Could I forgive my parents for their blind loyalty, their favoritism, their inability to see me for who I was? And if I did forgive them, what would that mean for my decision? In the end, I knew I couldn't make this choice based on what my parents wanted or what Matt wanted. I had to make it based on who I wanted to be. Was I the kind of person who could turn my back and never look back? Or was I the kind of person who could step in, even when it felt like I shouldn't have to? I didn't have an easy answer. I don't think there ever is one in situations like this. I spent days, weeks, even turning the decision over in my mind. I replayed every conversation I'd ever had with my parents, every fight, every moment of being told I was jealous or unreasonable. I thought about the victims, about the people who had lost so much because of Matt's greed. And I thought about myself, about the life I had built and the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. When I finally made my choice, it wasn't with certainty. It wasn't with a sense of righteousness or moral clarity. It was with a heavy heart and the understanding that no decision would feel entirely right. What I will say is this: the decision wasn't about Matt. It wasn't about my parents or the years of favoritism or even the victims. It was about me. It was about the kind of person I wanted to see when I looked in the mirror, the kind of life I wanted to lead. And maybe I made the right choice. Maybe I didn't. But at the end of the day, I made my choice. What would you have done? The envelope sat on the kitchen table for a long time before I finally sent it. Whether it held a check, a letter, or nothing at all. That's not the point of this story. The point is the decision I had to make, the questions I had to confront, and the person I became in the process. After everything, I was left grappling with the same questions that had haunted me for years. What do we owe our family? Where do we draw the line between loyalty and self-preservation? And how much of ourselves should we sacrifice to fix someone else's mistakes? Loyalty is one of those words that feels simple on the surface. It's a promise, a bond, an unspoken agreement that you'll stand by someone no matter what. But what happens when that loyalty is one-sided? What happens when it's taken for granted, twisted into an obligation you never agreed to? Growing up, my parents made it clear that loyalty was the foundation of our family. We take care of each other, they'd say, no matter what. But what they really meant was, we take care of Matt. Time after time, their loyalty to him came at my expense. They gave him their time, their energy, their money, and left me to fend for myself. And now, after everything, they were asking me to extend the same loyalty to him that they had always denied me. Was that fair? Then there's justice. If life were fair, Matt would already be behind bars, paying for the lives he'd destroyed and the trust he'd shattered. But justice is rarely straightforward. I thought about the people he'd hurt, the retirees who lost their pensions, the single parents who handed over their savings, the families who were now struggling to make ends meet because they believed in him. They deserved justice. But so did I. I deserved justice for the years I spent being overlooked, for the sacrifices I made to prove I was worth as much as Matt, for the countless times I was told to put his needs above my own. Did helping him mean I was complicit in what he'd done? Or did walking away mean I was complicit in my parents' pain? And finally, there's self-worth. For years, I let my parents' choices define how I saw myself. I told myself I wasn't enough, that I wasn't deserving of their attention or love because I wasn't like Matt. But the truth is, self-worth isn't something you earn from others. It's something you build for yourself, brick by brick, with every choice you make. Helping Matt wouldn't have changed the past. It wouldn't have made my parents love me more, or see me as their equal, or acknowledge the ways they'd failed me. And refusing to help wouldn't have erased the years of hurt, or undone the damage he'd caused. In the end, my decision wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about proving something to myself. After I sent the envelope, I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. For the first time in weeks, the weight on my chest felt lighter, though it hadn't disappeared entirely. Did I make the right choice? I don't know. Maybe I did the right thing. Maybe I didn't. But what I do know is that I made my choice. The thing about family is that it's messy. It's complicated. It's a tangled web of love and resentment, loyalty and betrayal, hope and disappointment. We like to believe that family is unconditional, that no matter what happens, we'll always be there for each other. But sometimes, the conditions reveal themselves in ways we can't ignore. Sometimes, being there for your family means standing up for yourself. Sometimes it means walking away. And sometimes, it means finding a way to hold on to love while letting go of everything else. As I sat there, I thought about Matt. I wondered if he would ever take responsibility for what he'd done, if he'd ever understand the pain he'd caused, not just to his victims, but to me, to our parents, to everyone who had believed in him. And I thought about my parents. I wondered if they'd ever truly see me, if they'd ever understand the sacrifices I'd made and the strength it had taken to build a life on my own. But I knew I couldn't control their choices, just like I couldn't control Matt's. All I could control was myself. The decision I made wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean. It didn't tie everything up in a neat little bow or leave me with a sense of closure. Life doesn't work that way. What it did leave me with was clarity. Clarity about who I am, what I stand for, and what I'm willing to accept. Maybe that's enough. And now I'll ask you, what would you have done? Would you have helped him? Would you have walked away? Maybe I did the right thing. Maybe I didn't. But at the end of the day, I made my choice. What would you have done?